Welcome to the 3Haunted podcast, where we bring you all things horror, supernatural, folklore, mythology, and all things that go bump in the night.
Hey guys, this is your co-host Ashley, Gorilla Girl filmmaker, lunar goddess, and cinephile.
Hey y'all, this is your guest ghost host, Lila Kay. I'm coming at you from the Mile High to bring you chills and thrills.
And I'm your co-host, John Thomas, ghost hunter, super smartass, and film lover extraordinaire.
What's up, ghouls, gals, and geometry-loving pals? In today's episode, we'll be talking about sacred geometry. What is sacred geometry? Do we have a natural affinity for triangles, circles, and squares? Can Merkaba really take us out of this world? Tune in as we dive deep into the shapely sacred world.
But first, a word from our network sponsor.
Are you looking for more awesome podcasts? Head on over to withoutyourhead.com for access to the Without Your Head podcast network, where you'll find a variety of podcasts sure to keep you entertained and coming back for more.
Shane made me laugh. He was doing the do Egyptian thing.
Oh, I had my screen covered.
That was probably best because I almost busted out laughing. I couldn't hold it in.
Oh,
and I think we've got him paranoid now. He keeps looking behind him. It's the chupacabra.
all right, John, bring us back in.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We have Shane joining us again today. Welcome back, Shane.
What's up? Thanks for having me.
You guys ready to let the dogs out?
I have my
Somehow I
doubts.
feel like
All
the
right,
dogs
let's
got
fast
let in.
forward. Let's fast forward from the year 2000. That was my go-to song.
So, let's get into it. You are stalling.
Yeah.
We are going to get into sacred geometry. So, what is it that you all know about sacred geometry? Like, when were you, what's the basic concept you have in your head that pops into mind when you hear sacred geometry?
Let's see, sacred geometry.
He's Googling that.
Shane's Googling sacred geometry.
Well, he Googles. The only thing I can think of is just when we were going to Sedona and doing all of the vortex stuff. Sacred geometry kind of came up a little bit with that. And other than that, my brain hurts from trying to study and do all this. So,
Try to research this topic of the week.
yes.
I mean, I know it has it.
He's about to give us the Webster's dictionary.
Yeah, exactly. So the Wikipedia, but no, my overall take on it is, with my occasional study of the occult and things like that, is numerology plays into it, geometry plays into it. I'm a huge fan of symbols in general because I feel like symbols have driven our culture through astrology, through mathematics, and progressed our entire race throughout the millennia. And I feel like they've just, as of recent, kind of separated themselves from being religious or spiritual. And I feel like, our ancestors, they used the numerology and the geometry as a spiritual guide almost, or as a way to express that spirituality. And call it what you may. I mean, spirituality may have been UFOs guiding us, which would also explain why we used a lot of numbers and symbols and why they all seem to point the way to the stars. Or it might have been God or gods.
What about you, Lai?
For me, sacred geometry was not on my radar until I was doing research for this podcast, which was not that long ago. But looking back into it, it was like, oh, I've heard of the Fibonacci sequence. I've heard of the golden ratio. These are things that I had to learn about and study in my education, calculus, physics, things like that. So I think going off of this spiritual, sacred context, there's a more modern context in which it can be put into. So like equations and things like that, we still interact with those now, and it's not just something that, oh yeah, our ancestors used to do that,
Oh, thanks for demeaning what I said.
I would not, that was not That was not the point. It was taking it and making it modern.
I see. Well, what comes to mind with numerology to me for the I don't know, when you think of like geometry and numerology, I always think of going back to Tetragrammaton. When I was studying demonology, Tetragrammaton was one of the names of God. When I was studying, and you have to write that name in a circle when you make it around you. That's one of the names of God, and that protects you against the demon that you're summoning from ripping your soul apart. So Tetragrammaton is the four-letter Hebrew word, and it's transliterated as Yahweh, the name of the national God of Israel, obviously. I'm looking at the Wikipedia actual definition of Tetragrammaton, and I mean, it's kind of vague, but like tetra is consisting of four letters. So there's I don't know. I think we would have to look really deep into that, like what the meaning of Yahweh actually means, or why it's just four letters, why it's Tetragrammaton. I always thought that was interesting.
Yeah, for me, sacred geometry is very much, I think people hear it and they automatically associate like supernatural principles to it, when at its heart and foundation, it really is science and math. And so it's the mathematical principles applied to nature. So, we have the Fibonacci sequence, which was created long time ago by Leonardo Pisano Bugallo, right? And he applied this mathematical equation and overlaid it into how things look in nature. So how things are created, like spirals within leaves and within plants and flowers. And so we see a lot of these things that are at their root and foundation science and math, but have been then given the metaphysical properties to them. So the other applications that they can apply to, which I think are part of what we're going to discuss today, is how that science gets translated into a bit more of the metaphysical beliefs. Because we've got sacred geometry. Otherwise, we just say geometry, right? We just say math. But there is a metaphysical aspect to it that changes it from just geometry and just math to this sacred geometry principle. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I think we've all been exposed to it without realizing it. I mean, we see mandalas everywhere. Like, that's a thing right now, is they are everywhere. The coloring books with mandalas, the just wall hangings, like that is a very popular common image right now that we see everywhere. And mandala is actually, like, mandalas are a very precise image and representation of what sacred geometry is, as well as the spiral of the Fibonacci sequence.
Right. And Ashley, I like that you say that sacred is not necessarily spiritual. I think that that's a good distinction, where it can have those connections, but doesn't necessarily have to. And I think there's also this connection of, oh, well, spiritual is like ghosts and paranormal, and that's also not correct. Where you're talking about these metaphysical aspects and things like that, I think that that's important to bring up and really like focus in on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, look at the how our ancient ancestors, like the Greeks and the Egyptians, utilized geometry to make structures that now our modern minds can only go, oh, no, it had to have been aliens. I mean, that alone is, it deems it sacred. It's a very important thing that I think we all forgot, is that we could accomplish greatness with science.
Yeah, and the astronomy aspect of it, oftentimes when I look at sacred geometry, I kind of wonder, is it the chicken or the egg? When we look up at the sky and we see the constellations, because to your point, a lot of our structures back in ancient times were created based on constellations, where they were positioned in the sky and how that could be utilized. And that helped determine, not even like, yes, rituals, but not just rituals. I mean, that helped them determine harvest time. That helped them determine when to plant crops. So it had a very functional, practical purpose as well, to study the stars. And I wonder, because I think part of what I had read is that the triangle shape, which is one of the foundations, plane shapes of sacred geometry is the triangle. We have the triangle, the circle, and the square. And the triangle, they were saying, originally started to become, and granted, we don't have stuff back in the day to really be able to determine how factual this is, but it's this idea that that was the common shape that really started to be the founding, I guess, shape within the sacred geometry because of the constellations.
Obviously, they were playing Squid Games.
Oh gosh.
So the triangle is a very, you know,
Well, it's the strongest shape, right?
yeah, and it's a foundation. It is the number one foundation shape of sacred geometry. It is the first plane shape. And I find it interesting because a lot of the different cultures have a tie to sacred geometry, which I think is really important, right? It shows that we all, no matter our background, have an affinity towards this predisposition to being drawn to these shapes. But no matter the background, the triangle represents very common things in a lot of these different cultures, whether it be Egyptian or Jewish or Hindu. The triangle represents like birth and life and fertility. So I think that's really neat to start to see that people are finding common meanings behind these very simple shapes.
Well, I mean, even Christianity uses the triangle, the Trinity. You know, the scutum fidei, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then you look at the importance of geometry. And it's funny because my mom used to practice feng shui. When she learned about it, she used to have everything kind of organized in the house as feng shui because she wanted to bring that positive energy and bar the bad energy out of the house. So I remember mirrors all of a sudden appeared all over my house now, like on the doors, and then everything was organized in a different. I'm like, you know, at the time I don't think I understood it, but you know, now as I'm older, I'm like, yeah, I need more mirrors in my house.
Not me. I don't do mirrors. Mirrors freak me out. Just for a whole other reason. But yeah.
After watching Poltergeist 3, I can't get down with mirrors, like where I'm going to cross in front of one in the dark, because nope.
They actually had a movie called Mirrors.
Yeah,
with,
that Kiefer Sutherland one.
Yeah.
That scene where his
horrible.
wife or sister ripped her own jaw off.
Yeah.
I still think about that every single time I take a shower by myself.
Right. Freaky.
One of the things that I found really interesting that I read was that in the ancient times, it is believed that the experience of sacred geometry was essential to the education of the soul. That by familiarizing ourselves with these geometrical patterns and like these numerical codes, it was symbolic of like our own inner geometry within ourselves, because at our base, we are sacred geometry. And so in order to gain like a higher consciousness and self-awareness, we had to study that external to us, and it would help us tap into that internal geometry within us. Holy moly, that's quite a bit to chew on, right?
Right.
But it kind of makes sense. Like I think about in college, like in the psychology disciplines, we study other animals to learn more about ourselves as humans, especially when it comes to like studying behaviors of children, because it's kind of frowned upon to just study children, right? And put children in a room and just stare at them for a while. It happens, but it's not as common. So what we do is we study like the children or like the young, immature animals of other animals, and typically primates, because by studying the young in the primates, we're able to correlate those behaviors into the children of humans and the developmental patterns and the behavioral patterns. So for me, that kind of makes sense, that to understand ourselves more and tap into that, I guess, geometry within ourselves, we study that and focus on that externally to us. That was a lot.
Interesting. Well, I mean, the study of animals, I mean, that's always been you look at the Kung Fu monks, I'm blanking out right now.
I was hoping you were going to say Kung Fu Panda.
I was going to say,
Kung Fu Panda.
We
Sorry.
were talking about animals, and
I
you
went
said
panda.
Kung Fu. Yeah.
Well,
Automatically.
what's funny about that is they actually got their idea from the monks.
Who were not pandas.
Who are not pandas. No, they're a specific group of monks, and it's one of the hardest temples to get into. They basically meditate through kung fu, but that's where you go if you want to learn kung fu from the best. But all their kung fu styles, for the most part, are derived from styles of animal defense techniques. So you have the monkey, the stone monkey, the wood monkey, the snake, and they all have studied that from the animals to get it, and that's been thousands of years old already. I don't know what that has to do with geometry, but
But now it's out there.
We see that in yoga too, though. Like a
Yeah.
lot of the yoga poses are named after animals. And I think to your point, how we learn to, I guess, ground out and really strengthen within ourselves is by studying nature, whether it be other animals or studying the shapes in nature, I suppose. There is strength, like you said, the strongest shape is the triangle. There is strength in triangles. And we also find that with squares and circles and the, what is it, the flower of, is it the seed of life or the flower of life? I should know this.
Both. They have both.
Shaolin is the name of the monks, by the way.
The flower of life.
Yes.
Oh, yes, Shaolin. So the flower of life is the physical representation of the connection with all living things in the universe. But the flower of life really is the integration of all of those plane shapes, the triangle, circle, and squares. So again, it's becoming one of those things, and I think we discussed this in a previous episode, where I feel people are leveling up, for lack of a better term, and kind of awakening into that next space, because we're starting to see these things become more and more present and common in our surrounding world. They're becoming trendy because people are searching for it, whether it be the flower of life or mandalas, or any of those shapes. That sacred geometry is actually becoming more and more common. You go to Home Goods, and most of the decor, you're gonna find those sacred geometrical shapes. And I think it's kind of interesting. We're being drawn to it. It's aesthetically pleasing to our eyes. But the question is, why are we drawn to it? Inherently, why are we so drawn to that?
I think the thing is once you bring something to our attention, like, you're going to be interested in it. So talking about, like, for instance, the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence, you point that out and you're like, hey, this happens in nature, this happens in real life. People are going to talk about it and they're going to want to see it. It's something about that number. Like, our museum here in town had a whole exhibit on numbers. It was like a magic in numbers sort of situation where they went through and were like, here's some examples of where we find the golden ratio in real life. Here are these other patterns. And people loved it. People loved the exhibit. Like, when I went, I loved it. Maybe that's just because I'm a big old dork, but I thought it was so interesting to see, like, wow, this is actually real. Like, you see these patterns and it's not just a coincidence. Like, this is something that actually happens in nature.
Yeah, and if you go back, it's funny because, like, you go back to one of the strongest empires in the world, and their structures are still around because they harnessed geometry, is ancient Egyptians. So if you go back to ancient Egypt, in Arabic, the name, I guess, is Al-Chem, which is the base for alchemy. And so that's where the idea of alchemy was born. But if you look at the definition of geometry, it actually means earth measurement. So if you actually look at the plot of the ancient pyramids and everything, it lines up with a lot of their sequences and their maps of what they laid out for geometry. And they used ancient geometry as a way for, what's the word? For consciousness. They equated it with consciousness.
Yeah, and I think that's where the sacred comes in when we're talking about sacred geometry, because we're taking those geometrical principles, which are real, those are true, those are hard principles that are defined by math. But then we apply the principles that, whether it be the Egyptians or any of the other cultures that feel that that geometry amplifies our connection to the earth, to our spirit, and creates a harmony within ourselves. and not only within ourselves, but to the outside world. So it's almost like a conduit to that harmony. And I think some cultures even go so far as to call it sacred architecture, because they do feel it underlies everything and it's woven into the fabric of all creation. So by understanding that sacred architecture, by understanding the simplicity and yet how complex those shapes are, we understand ourselves and everything else.
Right. Well, I know that like when they build churches and stuff, it's kind of based on some of the sacred geometry stuff as well. The National Mall in Washington, D.C. is constructed in the shape of the Tree of Life symbol, which I thought was interesting.
It's because Freemasons were behind it.
There you go.
Freemasons like their sacred geometry.
They do like their sacred geometry. Everything is geometric.
Yep. Makes sense.
Yeah, but it all derives from the ancient times. So from the ancient Egyptians, we get a lot of our teachings from that time period. King Solomon's temple, which I'm familiar with. And then it all goes back to, like you guys were discussing, the Flower of Life, which is inspired by Metatron's cube.
Yep.
And I'm looking at this webpage right now that literally breaks down Metatron's cube and says, if we take the nodal grid of this shape, we can convert it to an XY projection. In other words, if a cube can give birth to a star tetrahedron, then it's no surprise that this wavelength of squared 2 can be reflected in 2 dimensions as well. Yeah, see, this is where it gets way beyond me.
The actual mathematical side of
The
it.
mathematical side, I'm like,
Nope.
squirrel.
But you can't have the geometry and you can't have the patterns without the numbers.
Right.
And that's why, like, it is very math heavy and very science heavy. Like Ashley was saying earlier, like, they go hand in hand.
Oh, yeah. That's why the pharaohs just said, build that.
Just like that, just build it.
Just like Steve Jobs. I don't think Steve Jobs knew anything about math, science, or geometry. He just said, like Bill Burr says, I want my whole music collection in that box. Get on it.
Yeah, he was the idea man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and to Lila's point, like, you can't have the math not present. And there's actually an author out there, Stephen Skinner, and he talks about how, because sacred geometry is kind of trendy right now, and like the Fibonacci sequence and the spiral shape you get, he's like, you'll find people that will interlay it over an image, whether it be a human body or plant or whatever, and force it to fit on that. And he's like, you're missing the whole point. Like, by changing those ratios and changing that mathematical foundation, that's no longer the shape that you're calling it. That's no longer the Fibonacci sequence. It very much is defined by those ratios. And so he's just like, the result of what we're finding nowadays is that we're going from sacred geometry to unanchored geometry. Because they're just like, look, I found the Fibonacci sequence and shape and you're this pretty like thing. And it's like, no. You made
nice
that
try.
fit.
Yeah. It's because it's aesthetically pleasing. It's because we want to see patterns. We want to see these shapes and we want them to fit like our image of, this looks perfect. This looks correct. But yeah, by changing that math, it is not correct anymore.
But that's where I'm still like, there's a part of me that's trying to lock in on, is why do we want that? Why are we so like insistent on those geometrical patterns, those geometrical shapes? Why does that appeal to us? What inside of us is saying,
Feng shui.
that's right, that's what I need?
It's your chi. It's your energy. It's your consciousness. Everything around us or inside of us all emits energy and it reflects on, bounces off of surfaces. So if it's reflecting off or bouncing back and you're bringing that bad energy and it's clashing with your good energy, then, hey, we're going to have to redesign the room.
We're going to need a bigger room.
More triangles.
Oh my gosh.
More
Speaking of
triangles.
triangles.
More cowbell.
I love triangles. But speaking of triangles, have you guys heard of the, and I'm going to say it 2 different ways, the Merkaba or the Merkaba?
Not until we got ready to record today.
Okay. So in modern esoteric teachings, it's taught that the Merkaba, which is not a modern thing, but this is what they teach about it now, is an interdimensional vehicle consisting of 2 equally sized, interlocked tetrahedra lights with a common center. So one of the tetrahedra points up and the other down. And so I was trying, I was reading on this and I still can't figure out, how do those lights form? Is this a thing that someone creates? You set yourself up in a room, or is that light generated from you? If so, how does that generate? In some of the pictures that I saw, it looks like that they've got the chakras identified throughout the body. So I'm wondering, is it once you align through your chakras, you yourself create those lights around you? And
You're the human battery.
Yeah, you're the human battery. So when you supercharge your lights, we have interdimensional travel.
Sounds easy to me.
Well, to me, it just sounds like another way of saying meditation to cosmic consciousness. So cosmic awareness.
And I just automatically think of, astral projection and stuff with that as well. I don't know, just where my mind went, but yeah.
Yeah, because hearing the definition of or the guiding of how you're supposed to achieve it, because they're counter rotating apparently, so they get some movement going, along with specific breathing techniques and mudras, so hand finger placements. You can activate a non-visible saucer-shaped energy that is, I guess, at the base of your spine, which to me sounds like some of the principles we learned before. The Kundalini energy is the strong energy based at your spine. So it sounds like all these different cultures are saying the same thing. We have a very strong energy source at the base of our spine, and if we can tap into that and unlock it, we can achieve a transcended state of whatever you want to call it: interdimensional travel, astral projection, cosmic consciousness, whatever. It sounds like we're all saying the same thing, just in different languages. And I like it, because when lots of different people are saying the same thing in different words, there's a truth behind it.
Exactly.
Ooh.
What? I thought Lila was going to say something.
I was like,
what?
I was just sitting with that for a second. I was letting it process.
Chew on that one for a little bit.
So when I was younger, I used to study different cultures and different religions and stuff like that, just because I wanted to, and I was very curious. And I always came up across old drawings and really ancient drawings of Indian culture. Indians are one of the oldest races out there. I'm talking about the older race of Indians, not Native Americans, but Indians. And when you look at a lot of their older drawings and the Vedas actually have sketches of vehicles that look like space vehicles. And I think that they had, maybe it was astral projection, maybe it was subconscious and not on a physical plane, but regardless, I think they had something figured out with and we're talking about ancient or sacred geometry. I think they had something figured out. When they invented yoga, they invented meditation. I mean, they had something when it came to releasing the mind onto a different plane. Thoughts, comments?
Well, everybody thinks when we're talking about, especially when it comes to the Hindu practice of meditation, that that's the final destination. And that's actually only the halfway point to get to the space of meditation where we do completely go from our ego into that connected collective consciousness. But there's actually past that. There's a space past that. And that's where I think when we're talking about these different backgrounds of different cultural explanations of this interdimensional vehicle, there is some kind of transcending, I guess, movement that's occurring. We are going out of our body and somewhere else. It's just really difficult.
Intergalactic, planetary.
Oh gosh, that's gonna be stuck in my head now.
Nice.
Just casually in the back of your brain.
Dun, dun, dun.
I just took your mind somewhere.
You did.
Yeah.
But now I want to try it. But I guess for me, it's like the shapes are the key to unlocking it, it feels like. When you can connect the shapes and make the patterns and connect it to where it truly connects within yourself to whatever geometry is going on within our DNA, that's when that happens. So it's like, oh my God, how do I do that? I want to go on that ride.
I think out of us three that are on this podcast right now, you would probably be the most successful at. Sorry, out of us four.
I was like, hang on a second. I was like, did I forget how to count? Or...
In my mind, I saw 3 screens, and
Yeah, fair enough.
yeah. I'm sorry, Layla. I would say
just
Ashley,
assumed
you're
it was
probably
me
gonna
that
be
was
the,
getting miscounted here.
I was saying me just because I, messed him up earlier. So
Anyway,
All right.
continue.
No, I'm done. No, I was gonna say, Ashley, you probably have the best opportunity or the best chances of achieving that.
right.
I mean, you're into the whole mind and body. You're more flexible than we are, for sure.
I don't think flexibility is a requirement for interdimensional travel.
I don't know.
I could be
Aren't
wrong.
you supposed to sit
Brain
in the
flexibility.
shapes?
Yeah.
Brain flexibility.
Isn't Twister ancient geometry?
I've done, as cliche as it sounds, I have gone into quite a few yoga practices where it just feels like a good workout. But there have been 2 or 3 occasions where at the end of it, it feels like my whole body is just like vibrating with like this invisible rhythm of like the earth. And I don't know how to explain that other than it just feels like the earth is pulsing through me. And I almost feel like I am, they call it a yogi high, where it's just like you're almost not in your head. And it's like, holy moly, how did that happen? Because I remember walking into class and starting class, but then it's just like this moving meditation occurs, which I feel like, not that I'm comparing myself to a monk, but I feel like that's what a lot of monks practice through that movement, through the martial arts movement, right? They are using moving meditation. A lot of people think that you have to sit still and put your hands on your knees to meditate. And I feel like that there are so many ways to get to point Z of that meditative state.
Zen Buddhism.
Yeah, there's so many ways to get to a meditative state. Yeah. Moving meditation is one of them. And it's not something I feel like I've done all the time, but when it hits, man, I'm telling you, afterwards, it's just like I feel like I am thoroughly connected to some kind of vibrational space within the earth. So then when we're talking about sacred geometry and I hear and read all of these different people that have studied it continuously using the same words, like these buzzwords of vibrational resonance with these shapes and vibrational resonance of the earth, it's like, wow, doesn't that make sense? We have a pulse. Why wouldn't the earth? Why wouldn't the energy within our world also have a pulse that we're connected to? We just don't realize it.
Yeah, I mean, the ancient Egyptians, when they were building and designing the Great Pyramids, they actually were building consciousness. They considered the Great Pyramid as the eye of the earth.
Yeah. And with that, I mean, the tip of the triangle, when it's pointing upward, it's supposed to, be indicating raising consciousness and all of that. So.
And you were talking about triangles earlier, and we were talking about Sedona beforehand, before we had even started this.
Right.
So can you kind of explain that situation and what like the triangle meant in that like context?
And with that, I was kind of go with the vibrating. You kind of felt that when we had gone from, I think it was the cathedral.
There's the chapel.
Your head was, it was the chapel.
Chapel of the Holy Cross.
How I'm the one messing up. Yeah, exactly. But yeah.
Yeah, so I think I'm just kind of sensitive to the triangular shape. I don't know why, it's just a thing. So when we were in Sedona and we went to the Chapel of the Holy Cross, oh my gosh, at the base, and anybody who wants to get the full story, listen to the episode, season 1. But at the base, when we got off of the Chapel of the Holy Cross, my head was just like, it felt like it was vibrating like crazy. And I told the guys, oh my God, my head's buzzing. And they put their hands next to my head, and y'all felt, I guess, like static electricity coming from me. But
it was absolutely weird. It was so strange, but yeah.
It was weird. I've never felt anything like that. Yeah, and So then when we went to the next space, the next vortex, we climbed that. I looked across and realized we were in direct line with the Chapel of the Holy Cross.
Crazy.
And so then I looked up the other vortex that we were going to, and sure enough, it was at point 3. It was a triangle. It was in a triangular shape. Now the interesting thing, it wasn't like an equilateral triangle, so it was more of the long triangle. And the thing I found interesting is that the vortexes were assigned genders according to people, like feminine energy, masculine energy, neutral energy. So the vortex that was at the very longest tip of the triangle point, it was the neutral. And then the two that were at the bottom, closer to each other, were the masculine and feminine.
Ooh.
And you could see them directly from each point. So it wasn't like a random triangle where you can draw a line on a map and hit another line at some point. You could see each one from the opposing, vortex point. And I found that interesting. And as we've learned more about geometry and energy and stuff like that, I found that especially interesting because in Kundalini Yoga, there is a belief that your neutral strong energy, the strongest energy, is at the base of your spine, and then the masculine feminine form either side of your body. So to me, that was almost like a triangular representation that we also found in Sedona. Love triangles?
I'm kind of sensitive to triangles myself. I think they're pretentious.
Oh gosh.
I don't like them. I think they're rather smug.
Circles are pretty important too.
Circles are very important.
So I think we forget that our energy can be influenced by many different things, whether it be music. Music can influence our energy, the vibration of our energy, whether we go high, we go low, but so can visual stimuli. And so when we are looking at sacred geometry, I think that is why mandalas, especially because they are just a very complex compilation of shapes, I think that is why those are very appealing to people, as well as these very 3D triangular shapes that we're seeing pop out in home decor right now. But I think there's also something we're forgetting that the visual stimuli, when it comes to shapes, has influenced, and it's in the demonology realm, Shane, and that's the use of shapes and visual stimuli through sigils.
Yep.
By focusing on those shapes. So by focusing on mandalas, those are used to actually help people come into a meditative state, to help bring their mind in and go into that meditative state. And then with sigils, those are used to focus on, but not to go into a meditative state. It's really to call up whatever demon you're trying to be homies with. But that's a different.
But in the same topic, the protective circle. That's been used in witchcraft and demonology, for thousands of years. But it's because it resembles that spiritual connection and strength. So if it gets broken, in demonology, the demon could, just one little tiny little scratch in that circle, that demon could then leap at you and drag you down to hell. And that's why it's essential that it remains unbroken.
You know what I think is interesting is that the circle itself has defined points, right? So the energy that we create from the points to connect those creates that circle. So our energy flows through that circular motion, but the points themselves ground out that shape. So when we're talking about altar circles, you have your north, south, east, west. When we're looking at the triangular shapes, that's a shape. I know, your pretentious shape, but in Wicca, the triangle, the triad is very important. The power of 3. But again, it's that circular protection that energy connects those points together. So I think the circle itself is the energy, whereas the triangles and the squares are the grounding points that help create that circle of energy.
Very interesting. It's like the, what is that in Harry Potter? The
Hallows?
Yes, thank you. Deathly Hallows.
I want to get that made
actually,
into an aerial apparatus so badly. I'm going to. It's just
you
got to be
should.
really big because that's what she said.
Damn, she beat me.
Because I mean, think about it. You have to encompass the circle, the triangle, and the line. Like that's got to be a pretty big shape.
Well, you would be the line, wouldn't you?
Even that's a very intentional shape, right? The circle and the triangle and the line.
But they put the circle inside the triangle, didn't they, for the Deathly Hallows? Yeah, which is interesting. The Goetia and the Megaton with the amount of symbols in there or seals, for the demons and everything. There's a lot of numerology and geometry in the Key of Solomon. If you guys get a chance, look it up. But Key of Solomon has a lot of stuff as far as summoning in there, and there's a lot of math at play, and there's a lot of symbols, and a lot of them are related to ancient geometry, sacred geometry.
I try to not make it a habit of staring too long at demon sigils just because I don't need any unexpected visitors to come over.
Yes.
Fair.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. Ever since kids, I haven't looked at them either.
Nope, I'm good. I look at them even for a moment and I'm like, oh, that doesn't feel right.
Yeah. Energy.
Yeah.
Energy is definitely, it comes in all forms, and things, shapes, images carry energy whether we realize it or not.
Yes.
Well, I think the thing about a circle, too, going back to that, is it represents wholeness and like totality, but it also represents nothingness and like emptiness. So it's got the double meaning of this could be everything or it could be nothing. And I think that that's what's interesting about that, is where it's like the triangle, the square, those shapes, they have more of like a understood purpose, maybe not purpose, but understood meaning, I guess. Whereas the circle it's more on the fence of, it could mean this or it could mean this, depending on the context in which you find that circle in. Does that make sense?
Kind of like the hula hoop.
Like a hula hoop. Yeah. Sure, we'll go with that.
Could be something,
Could be nothing.
or it could be nothing.
But even a hula hoop has its purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing I found interesting that I do want to bring up, because our previous guest of ours mentioned this, and I think it's worth noting and mentioning again on this specific episode, is our tie to crystals.
Yes.
The fact that we very much are connected to crystals, even when people don't want to acknowledge it, they really do get drawn to crystals. Again, you can go to Home Goods and buy a huge ass rose quartz for $10 now. And the sacred geometry within the crystals themselves.
So it's funny that you mentioned crystals and drawing of energy, because the mansion or hotel that The Shining was filmed in is thought to have had huge quartz deposits underneath that draws all the spirits and the spiritual activity inside,
It sure does.
which is in Colorado.
Yes, which helps with the residual haunting stuff. But yeah, we've actually seen underneath in areas of the hotel doing tours and stuff with Callie, actually, when she was a guide there. And
She was a guide there?
yeah, she sure was.
So
That's how we
awesome.
met
I
her.
didn't know that. Why is
Yeah.
why are we not having that podcast?
Yeah, no, she's great.
You know, prisms are within the quartzes, and prisms are, the generator of light. They reflect, they refract. And light is a form of energy. But I think it's not just light that these quartz crystals within our earth are directing. Not only are they storing it, but they're also directing it out. I think that there is an energy and a vibration and a resonance that are also being conducted through these crystals that are part of our earth, right? That's just natural geology. And I do believe that is once again a reflection, pun intended, of our sacred geometry.
I think she was building up just
Yeah, that
for
was a good
that
one.
pun.
Yeah,
right
she's
there.
preparing for sure.
It's like, how am I going to fit this one through? Like, how am I going to make this joke work?
You know what's funny is I didn't realize I was going to make that, like, that was a thing until it came out of my mouth. And then I was like, oh, that's funny. But,
That's great.
but it's another reflection. And I wonder we're back to life mimicking art or art mimicking life. Like, we have sacred geometry as this concept, but is it really a concept, or is it just truth that through this geometry there is energetic vibration that's present? There is a consciousness and an elevation and connection that occurs by understanding it, whether it be understanding it through ways of the math or understanding it through ways of the visual, just staring at it, soaking it in, absorbing it. There is something that occurs, a connection with this consciousness and this vibration that we can't literally see by studying these things, by acknowledging that is present and that is inside of us and external to us. That's like our foundation. So we say math is our foundation, which it is, but I think it's so much more than the math. It's this concept of these rays of energy that come together to make triangles, circles, squares, all the things that connect us. We're all just one happy connection.
But we're all different, like snowflakes.
Here you go. Also patterns, also geometry.
Also patterns and crystals.
I think where you're asking, is this truth or is it just something that we notice? I mean, numbers don't lie. Math doesn't lie. They are consistent. You can't change math equations or things like that to fit what you want. What is in front of us is, I think it is truth. I mean, we see these equations and it's not a coincidence that these patterns and these shapes, they fit into those equations. They are interlocking, and energy does carry through that. Like, having shapes and noticing those patterns, you are giving your energy to that, saying, oh, this is interesting.
To your point, though, by acknowledging it, by giving it words, by giving it math, because at the end of the day, math is the language we created. It wasn't something that existed prior to people. Math itself, the principles still existed. What we're measuring still existed, but the math and the equations and the language, that's something we came up with to define these things. And I do think, to your point, by giving it those definitions, by giving it that math and that language, we are giving it energy. And by giving it energy, we're connecting to it. We are creating that tunnel of connection. So I completely agree with you.
And it's all a circular machine. It all is reliant on each other.
We're all one big prism.
Yes.
We all come together in a nice big circle.
It's an offering. It's an offering that creates that connection. Like when you're looking at a sigil, you're opening your energy and allowing that energetic connection to occur. You're meeting it halfway. So to me, I feel like that's the same thing when we're studying these sacred geometrical shapes. We are opening our energy and ourselves, removing part of that veil to allow that connection. And where that takes us, I don't know. I haven't gotten there yet. I want to purchase my interdimensional vehicle, or at least take it for a test drive.
When we were talking about that earlier, when you were describing the circles and the light and everything, my mind, again, being the nerd that I am, was thinking of the Tron motorcycles.
Oh, yeah.
For some reason.
Nice.
So, yeah, that's where I went. Where I went.
Noise.
Is it Tool that uses the Merkaba
Yeah.
as their symbol?
I think yeah.
A lot of the Tool imagery is like very heavy in sacred geometry.
Well, one of their songs, they literally plotted out, and it took them like a year to write, but it's a mathematical equation. Might be 46 and 2, but I forget. When I hear math, I go,
Yeah, that's how I am.
I think you're talking
1
about
plus 1 is
lateralis.
5.
might be
I think
lateralis.
it's lateralis.
Yeah, I think it's lateralis.
It's the Fibonacci sequence that I think they were saying they use. Although, was that proven true?
I believe
I think it was,
Maynard actually came out and said it.
Yeah, okay. Yes, then it's lateralis. I love lateralis. Sorry. I love all things Maynard.
Yeah.
The wine, the music, all of it.
I don't know if I like his new band, though.
Pussifer?
Yeah. Not really a fan. I've tried some of their stuff. It's not. I like Tool and I like Perfect
Did
Circle.
you try 2220, Rev 2220? I'll send it to you because
send it to me.
you might change your mind.
Just can you share it via Spotify or no? Who cares?
Yes.
Just
Yeah,
just
we
send it to me. I'll listen
send it
to
to
it. I don't know why that matters.
Yes.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
I think it's a phenomenal song and it's blasphemous, but I don't care. Okay.
The tangents we're going on today.
Yes.
Tangent.
We're all on one, folks.
Like geometrical tangent.
I didn't think of that. And then as soon as you repeated it, I was like, hold on a second.
Cosine. And
Mic
tangent.
drop.
And sign.
I told you I love my puns. I will find them anywhere. Oh, yes. Okay.
Oh my goodness.
Now, I will say, because sacred geometry is aesthetically pleasing, a lot more art, especially like public art, is catering to that. So I would encourage listeners to look into your like cities, especially like big cities nearby, to see what art installations are currently out there, because they're coming out with some really cool things. Like in Minnesota, they have like an art sculpture park, the Franconia Sculpture Park. There's some really cool, large, like 30-foot structures that have like sacred geometrical shapes within them. This is not so new, but a very cool spot if you ever go to Utah. The Spiral Jetty is a very interesting spiral that was built using lava rock onto the Great Salt Lake. And you're supposed to walk it. And as you walk it, it's used as like a meditation. So a movie meditation, you walk it and, you know, hopefully end up in some kind of movie meditation state. Really cool though, if you've never been. But it does take like 2 hours to get there because it's not on the southern side of the Great Salt Lake. It's on the northern side. Really beautiful though. I have some pictures I can send you guys.
I hear that's where they have the famous math teacher's tree, the geometry.
I was like, where is he going with
Where
this
is he
one?
going with? She knew. He's going somewhere. Oh, man. You're going straight to your
goodness.
room. Oh, wait, you're already there.
Yep.
Oh, dear.
I'd like to tie some of these things together to see, because people seem to have like this really natural inclination to create structures inspired by sacred geometry. And I'm not talking like just buildings, but art installations and stuff like that. I think it'd be cool to go to these hot spots of activity and see what kind of sacred geometry we find there. Kind of like you were saying, Shane, like the Winchester Mystery House and stuff like that, and see what we find. Because I bet it's all tied together.
Oh, heck yeah.
It's an energetic conduit.
You were saying, you know, check out art, you know, be aware. I guess for us and also for the audience, be careful of the art that you consume, because a lot of sacred geometry and things like that, like we were talking about earlier, has cultural significance. Mm-hmm. So be aware and be conscious of what art you're consuming, making sure that it is respectful to the culture that it comes from.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of that, just be mindful of, if you are going to these spaces, that not only are you respecting the cultures, but you're respecting the structures themselves, especially in the time of social media right now, where it's really cool to take a selfie and do things that are daring or risque. Just try and respect the spaces that you are going to and the structures themselves as well.
Yep.
Well, I think that this has been an awesome episode. Do you guys have any final thoughts before we start to wrap it up?
No, I think Lila wrapped that, my thoughts up perfectly right there.
Yeah.
Respect and safety.
Yes, all the puns on this episode were acutely funny.
No need to be so obtuse, Shane. Oh, we're so good.
Good job.
I got nothing. I'm horrible at this.
Bunch of squares.
Due to my obsessively acute geometry addiction, I always end up being less than right.
Ashley didn't get that one.
No, I got it. I just...
Oh, just wasn't funny.
It was just the
face was just
groan.
All right, bringing us home. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into this episode of 3Haunted Podcast. I am your host, John Thomas.
I am Ashley, Lunar Goddess.
And I'm Lila Kay.
If anybody has any questions, comments, or concerns for all of us, we throw that in there every once in a while, please email us at 3hauntedpodcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't done so already, please follow and subscribe to all of our social media. You don't want to miss one crazy moment or bad joke.
Until next time.
You think this is a game? You think this is a motherfucking game? I just want to go out like DMX just once.
Oh my goodness.